Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our explorations, and our discoveries with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2022. That brings us to a release which already exists in the Criterion Collection at spy number 562. But this year, on this occasion, Criterion has re-released this work into its catalog, this time under a 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo. And so I'd like to focus our attention today in the context of this work and also in the context of that particular format choice from Criterion this year. And this is a work which is described as being from the year 1981, and the name of the filmmaker is Brian De Palma, and the name of the work is Blowout. This is the work from 1981, the great, exceptional, landmark work from the brilliant filmmaker and artist that is Mr. Brian De Palma, and written and directed by Brian De Palma, and director of photography Vilmos Zsigmond, and music by Pino Donaggio, and editor Paul Hirsch and others. And we have this brilliant cast included, in which are, for example, Nancy Allen and John Lithgow and Dennis Franz and John Travolta, the great John Travolta here, portraying this brilliant tour de force performance that is part of this brilliant tour de force work of art, Blowout. So there's so much I think one can say about this work, Blowout, and where does one begin when one tries to discuss this exceptional work? I think we can focus in, or one place we can focus in is just a general description of the plot and characters and how this carries us through beginning, middle, and end. In a general way, I think we can focus in on this idea of the sound effects or sound recording duties that are being carried out by our main character. This is the John Travolta character, Jack. And during these particular activities of sound recording, sound mixes, and an examination of this world of filmmaking and movie making and the creation of illusion, and also the idea of perception, sight and sound, what it is we see, what it is we hear, and how that is registered both in the direct context of the sound recording artist, but also as a metaphor for the idea of reality and illusion, of things that we perceive might not always correspond to what can be said to be quote unquote the truth. So in this context, we already have set in motion then a whole bunch of plot details that unravel almost at a lightning pace speed. So one of these plot threads involves an accident of some sort, involving a car being driven, and a car being there's a car that then flies off the road and causing a significant damage, and also death and near death when it comes to maybe the persons that might be found in such car. That is only the beginning of what might be said to be a type of espionage or even political intrigue, because also set against the backdrop of this quote-unquote accident is the idea of, well, whether or not it was an accident, and also whether this may or may not have to do with larger political forces or political generated forces that have to do with maybe elections and candidates and the like. And so we have a political conspiratorial type of edge to this film, this thriller that is pushing the film along at a very lightning and a very pulsating way. And that is one aspect as well. Another aspect of a plot thread that is unraveling before our very eyes in this brilliant Brian De Palma fashion is the notion of the relationship that is emerging, the human relationships that are emerging. So we can probably classify these into maybe a number of groups. One such group is the what might be said to be emotional core of this work, which is the relationship between Nancy Allen's character Sally and Jack. This is the John Travolta character, and because of the situation or the circumstances of involving such car accident, these two characters, through such circumstances, end up crossing paths and interacting with each other. And indeed, we get through their interaction a lovely kind of rapport, a chemistry that is very tender, very, very charming, very down to earth, and very earnest, and quite loving as well, and quite warm. And indeed, the relationship here between Nancy Allen's character and John Travolta's character is doing a number of things. It's, of course, showcasing and highlighting the brilliant performances of these two actors. Nancy Allen is doing a brilliant job. John Travolta is doing a brilliant job. And then when they are together on screen, they form a type of emotional core, emotional connection, a type of heart and soul of this film Blowout that is so key when we think about the other category of relationships that might be said to be part of the overall dynamic of the plot Blowout, which is the thriller element, the killer or the assassin element, or the element of danger and threat and menace. And we have characters that might be said to be shrouded in mystery, and perhaps even with a sense or current or edge, or perhaps not just a nuanced edge, but perhaps a direct and chilling edge of danger, menace, and risk, and indeed death and destruction. And so when we are encountering these other characters along the way, this creates a tremendous threat to the emotional core that we also see developed. So will the emotional core become subdued, or will it become defeated in the face of these images and sources of peril that are confronting them, and indeed confronting us? Or will they withstand such shocks, such dangers, and come out on top? So this becomes part of the mystery. This becomes part of the thriller aspect. This also becomes part of the high intensity tension that is the very, say, the very heart and soul, the very fiber of this work Blowout. Now, there is so much here, therefore, in terms of a emotional drama dynamic, a type of mystery dynamic, a murder mystery dynamic, a political thriller conspiracy dynamic, and also a chase film, because there are elements of danger. There are quote unquote villainous forces or evil forces that are chasing our heroes and are in pursuit of our heroes. So there is that dynamic as well. So there is a lot here when it comes to Blowout. Now, what makes it another level that Brian De Palma and company are then adding to this mix is the idea of the filmmaking aspect, and how the filmmaking aspect that we see within the world of Blowout, specifically in the hands of Jack, the John Travolta character, in his sound mix design recording aspect. We see the craft at play. We see the gears turning. We see the tape running. We see the way in which the dials, the meters, are shown as the recording apparatus is used, the machinery is used, the microphones are used, and the tape recordings are used in order to record these things. And not only do you see the machinery, the apparatus at play, and the craft and the mechanics of the recording apparatus, both in terms of sound and indeed also in the context of filmmaking. We also see the subject of such recordings. So we see and hear, for example, couples perhaps thinking that they're alone, but in fact they're being recorded, or maybe the sound of wind, or the sound of birds or owls in the distance, or the sound indeed of a car, or the sound indeed of some kind of noise or echo, or some other type of quote unquote unknown force whatever the case may be. So sounds become very paramount, not just in the context of an investigation, the plot investigation, but also in the almost metaphysical way in which this film Blowout works with us, the viewer. We are also privy to the idea of the creation or the recording apparatus. Thus, we are privy to the notion that this film lends itself towards, which is film within the film, and calling attention to the idea of the recording apparatus, and also calling attention to the fact that this becomes, in many ways, a type of connecting device. And this is a way, of course, that Jack is able to connect to the world around him. And also it becomes part of his own, say, character arc, especially when we get to know him, a little bit of his backstory and why it is he is where he is at the start of the film. And sound recording has a lot to do with this. And so it has a very elemental part, not just to the plot, but also to character development. And also it has this great way of connecting the story with the craft that is on display. And whenever we're talking about a Brian De Palma film, we are always too focused in on the craft and the way in which things are mixed together, and the style and the devices. Now, this film Blowout is one of the supreme examples of the Brian De Palma craft, with the great partnership collaborations that he has with his fellow artists that are on the crew. So we also have the great contributions of the director of photography, Vilmar Sigmund, or we also have the great music that's added onto the Pino Donaggio score, etc. And then we also have the way in which certain shots are composed within the same frame. Sometimes we have what is referred to as a split screen component. Other times we have what's known as the diopter component, things within the same shot, but there is a distance between them. But that distance notwithstanding, they both are within the same frame, held in focus, which is a very technically advanced achievement in terms of capturing this notion. And it creates a sense of almost surreal distance, but also it has the way of a type of connecting effect, of connecting the two figures that are in the same screen, which is in an interesting way. And this is talked about in some of the supplements later, in particular the Noah Baumbach discussion with Brian De Palma. This is referred to very interesting, the way in which these techniques have a type of psychological effect on us, the viewer, and they show either a distancing effect or they show a connecting effect. And this is quite fascinating because it shows that Brian De Palma is using technique, and using technique that indeed calls attention to itself, much like the film Blowout calls attention to itself and to the technique of sound recording and the like. So Brian De Palma is, I think, using techniques that do call attention to themselves, but that's okay. Because even though it does call attention to itself, we never lose sight of the story and the drama of the film Blowout, because it is that powerful. And indeed, this adds a sense of heightened tension and mystery and suspense, and indeed this type of bravura, almost surreal aspect of the world below, which is, I think, adding to the mysterious and overall type of the mystery thriller effect that also can be said to be somewhat ethereal and surreal, and sometimes going into slow motion, sometimes going into point of view shots, sometimes going into the way in which sound is heightened and augmented almost in an unnatural way, but that is also meant to drive our senses even further, thus creating even more tension, thus making this film that much more absorbing as a drama, as a thriller, as a political conspiracy type of a storyline as well. And indeed, too, before I go on to other points, this idea of the political landscape is very important, because there are echoes of certain political controversies and assassinations that are undoubtedly embedded in here. And this is, I think, part of the the type of, say, viewpoint that Brian De Palma seems to be espousing. And this is evident from Brian De Palma's body of work. For those who know Brian De Palma's body of work, perhaps films like Greetings and Hi Mom might come into the discussion here in terms of the way in which those films earlier in his filmography had a type of political aspect to it. And so here too, Blowout, there is undoubtedly the way in which this film is intertwining history, maybe particularly U.S. history, or perhaps even particularly recent U.S. history, that has a kind of very chilling and maybe even haunting remembrances in terms of what we see on screen and what this recalls in terms of our own understanding of recent historical events, in particular U.S. political history. So this has a very haunting currency about it that I think is also very much part of the Brian De Palma edge and drive and style and concern and consideration in all of his movies, in particular this film Blowout, and that makes it all the more fascinating. It's already fascinating to begin with. It's already brilliant to begin with, but that is yet another level in which this film works. So this is a film that operates so cleverly, so thoroughly, so brilliantly, and very much in the mold of American thrillers from the 1980s, Brian De Palma films from the 1980s, and it is grounded in so many strengths. Among those strengths is, and I'll return to this now, is the great performances. I mentioned already Nancy Allen's performance, John Travolta's performance. You also have to mention John Lithgow, who adds this absolutely unforgettable type of presence that John Lithgow gives. And it has this seemingly clandestine way that kind of creeps up on you. And that adds to the overall effect of this film, Blowout. I mean, this is a film that has a lot of sort of critical admiration, which has, I understand, grown over the years since its original release, which is quite wonderful indeed, and it's deserving of all that because, indeed, it sits so triumphantly in the context of 1980s cinema, 1980s American cinema, thriller cinema, and indeed the cinema of Brian De Palma. I mean, this is one of the greats. This is really one of the greats, and so it's wonderful that Criterion continues to make this available in its catalog, and it's wonderful too that this year Criterion has decided to, or has been able to, re-release this again, applying the 4K UHD format. So if you haven't seen this film yet, and if you are a fan of Brian De Palma works, or if you are a fan of mystery, thriller, suspense works that are so technically accomplished and also so emotionally absorbing at the same time, then you're in. There's Blowout is one of the best places to go, in my opinion, and I know the opinion of many others who are in love with this film and admire this film and have admired this film for many years. This is one of the greatest works from Brian De Palma. It's this work, which is Blowout. The Criterion Collection has re-released this film Blowout into its catalog, its physical media catalog, and it is at spine number 562. And I say re-release because what we have here that was released during this year of 2022 is the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo. And what this means is when I open the casing here, you can see the discs. There's a compartment on this side which is housing the two discs, the 4K UHD disc and then the Blu-ray disc, with this side, reserved for the booklet. And I've removed the booklet here in advance for purposes of today's discussion, but the booklet will go on that side of the compartment. If I may, just for comparison's sake, this is the earlier Blu-ray release from the year 2011. And when you open it too, you have the disc here. Excuse me, it's a little bit off. I apologize, but it's a single disc, and of course, I've removed the booklet here again for the Blu-ray release as well. Please pardon that appearance there. So we have therefore the Blu-ray disc, single disc, which has been made available, and I understand still is available as of the time of my making this video. But now we have the option of the 4K UHD disc. Now I should say here that the booklet indicates that on page 29 of the booklet, and it's a staple booklet too, just like the earlier 2011 release, which is great. And it says here on such page 29, Blowout is presented in the aspect ratio of 2.40 to 1 based on the 2011 2K restoration, which was supervised and approved by director Brian De Palma. This new 16-bit 4K restoration was created on a laser graphics director film scanner from the 35mm original camera negative. The 2.0 surround soundtrack was remastered from a 35mm magnetic track. Please be sure to enable Dolby Pro Logic decoding on your receiver to properly play the 2.0 surround soundtrack. On the 4K Ultra HD disc, the feature is presented in Dolby Vision HDR, high dynamic range. On the Blu-ray, it is presented in high definition SDR, standard dynamic range. So we have the Blu-ray disc, and also, as I mentioned, you have that Blu-ray disc, which has always been made available since 2011. And then now we have also the addition of the 4K UHD presentation. So I've seen this film a number of times. I've seen this film on the earlier Criterion release, and I've seen also it on this Criterion release, the 4K UHD and the Blu-ray. I love the Blu-ray. I love how it looks and feels and sounds. And it's really quite phenomenal too, and important because of the sound design. You know, sound is so important, so key in a film like Blowout. So it's great. It's always been a reliable presentation, and it's great that you have the Blu-ray. It's still being made available. And with that being said, I am also so impressed with the 4K UHD disc here. I was so thrilled to watch it. I was so thrilled to look and the look and feel of it. Now, I would say to my own eye, you know, I can, while I notice maybe some subtle differences in terms of a subtle, maybe what's the phrase, grading differences, perhaps to my own very amateurish eye. I notice some differences where I am quite impressed with the 4K UHD presentation. Also, I'm very impressed with the sound quality of it. I'm very happy with this. I'm very happy with this. But I was always happy with the Blu-ray. And so this is to say for anyone who is, say, maybe if you have the Blu-ray, you already have a great copy, in my view. So, but if you love the film, if you really love the film, this is your opportunity to see it in this presentation. So it really depends on what your needs are as the ultimate sort of consumer and your choice. If you are a real if you are a huge Brian De Palma film fan, or if you're a huge film fan of Blowout, it might be worthwhile to get this 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo. If you're on the fence and if you already have the Blu-ray, don't worry, because you have a great release of it already. So it's not necessarily the case that you need to get the 4K UHD of this or any release for that matter. But if you do end up choosing to get the 4K UHD, you're going to have a lot of fun with it. I know. So I certainly did. And as I say, I watched it. I watched these two releases. I watched them a number of times, in fact, and I was thoroughly impressed. So Blowout, the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo. Seems like, from my vantage point, whatever version or whatever format you end up relying upon, you're gonna get a lot out of it. I know. So it's wonderful to see this reemerge and to have this attention, the spotlight brought back on this film again, because again, it deserves as much attention as it gets. So that it can get, and because it is that much of a landmark masterpiece. So. Anyway, this is the just some comments about the format release. So now let us talk about the supplements, what we can find in terms of the supplements. Now, much like with many Criterion 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo edition of a film, the supplements will be found on the Blu-ray disc of this release, Blowout. And much like the Blu-ray, the single disc Blu-ray that we found released some years back, we have the same supplements that are carried over, in my understanding. So, and they are really great, So what are the supplements here? So the first supplement is the brilliant one-on-one discussion between Noah Baumbach and Brian De Palma. And I understand this is described as being from 2010. This is 57 minutes, so just shy of 1 hour. This is great. Anyone who is a fan of the film De Palma will love this, will surely love this if you haven't seen it already. This is great. Noah Baumbach is so very much, evidently, a lover and admirer of the works of De Palma, and he knows his works inside and out, and they have this wonderful, friendly rapport, very casual and also yet very honest and direct. And so this allows for specific questions that Noah Baumbach poses to Brian De Palma, and Brian De Palma is there in the same room, and he's talking. It's wonderful and very honest, very very upfront, and there's no. I love that. I love that directness. It's so great and refreshing, and we get so much information. You also get the sense of who these people are, and just how much I think there's a mutual respect in the. Oh, it's so great, so wonderful. So, and it's 57 minutes, so brilliant stuff. So they are talking here, for instance, about some of the great collaboration partnerships that were made between Brian De Palma and other members of the crew that he worked with on many a film, including Blowout. So he mentions here Paul Hirsch, Vilmos Zsigmond, and also working with Pino Donaggio, which is a great score, by the way. The score is fantastic. So, and also working with the actors here as well, John Lithgow and Nancy Allen and John Travolta, and so. And it's very fascinating to hear that with each of these, there is this is not the first time that he's working with these artists and professionals. So it's wonderful to get that mentioned. It's also a reminder too of the brilliant, almost organic nature of the catalog of Brian De Palma's films leading up to Blowout, and indeed subsequent to Blowout as well. But the mentioning of these names reminds us of their past work and prior films of the De Palma catalog, such as Obsession, such as Carrie, and the like, etc. So it's a great way to approach this particular discussion. And then also talking too about Philadelphia and how this is very important, as not just in terms of the setting for the film Blowout, but also and also the plot, and also some of the thematics when it comes to this idea of the political landscape and how displays of patriotism and the like, and parades and the like, but also how that figures into the plot dynamics, but also too how this is very important for Brian De Palma's own life and biography, because in terms of growing up and his own life growing up, he understands this place very well. He knows this place very well, and so a lot of the locations that are fundamental to the story of Blowout, he speaks here about. These were places that he knew, locations of places that he knew growing up. So really very cool indeed. Also, this idea too of how this film Blowout has many connections and currents in terms of a recreation of a crime, and how this is recreated, and how this recreation is part of the investigation aspect of the main character. This is the John Travolta character, and how he essentially stumbles upon maybe a crime, perhaps, who knows, and how he, after the fact, tries to piece together the puzzle pieces using the sound design, using his own, and how that, in a sense, triggers his own imagination, in a manner of speaking. And Brian De Palma mentions here how this idea of putting together these pieces of the puzzle, starting with the sound landscape alone, and then slowly building it to reveal what happened. This is very much akin to something like Snake Eyes, a film that Brian De Palma will make later in his career, which is a great film, by the way, as well, Snake Eyes. But also, too, there is this idea of the way in which Brian De Palma is applying technique and design. And here we have this great discussion here of what was mentioned, what I tried to mention earlier in this discussion, the split diopter, or the diopter technique of having two things within the same shot, but there's a distance between them, but they're both held in focus at the same time. Or we have the split screen, which is two separate shots that are connected by a split screen, a line down the middle. So in a sense, we have two separately filmed things that are combined within one frame. And so the split screen or the split diopter. So these are very different, of course, in terms of the technique involved. They might have a similar type of effect because there are essentially two things happening at the same time on the screen. And indeed, too, this is another occasion for Brian De Palma to connect with another work that he did earlier in his career called Dionysus in '69, the use of the split screen. In that film, the context is trying to cover or film a live play production, a theater production that had this interactive effect between the audience members and the actual performance itself. It was very interactive that way. So the split screen effect was used in that film, and then it's used in other subsequent films of Brian De Palma, including this film. But there's also the split diopter effect, which is the same object, the objects within the same frame, but there's a distance between them, and the idea of the focal plane focus. Now, what's so great here about Noah Baumbach and Brian De Palma's discussion, so it's great for so many reasons. One of such reasons being that they form a type of psychological type of reaction that one has when watching a shot that is the diopter effect versus the psychological effect that one has when watching a shot that is a split screen effect. And indeed, while there are similarities in terms of activity happening on both sides of the screen, there are arguably a lot of differences as well. And I love this point. I really love this point, and it's so key too. And this is also leading into the discussion of Hitchcock, Alfred Hitchcock, which is the idea of technique, cinema technique, that is being applied and employed in order to generate or to encourage a psychological effect in the mind of the viewer. And this is so fundamental to the philosophy of Hitchcock, and thus their acknowledgement of it here and the discussion of it here means too. And I don't mean to suggest the sort of the oft mentioned, say, homage dynamic relationship between the works of Hitchcock and the works of De Palma, but I mention it here because they mention it here too, which is the idea of the application of technique in order to create a type of emotional or psychological effect in the viewer. And this is so fundamental because it means that these techniques are not just for the technique's sake. They are there for a purpose in order to propel the plot or the understanding of the characters forward, or our understanding of the characters forward. So maybe when we see two characters in the same space but separated by a great distance, but they're still held in focus due to the diopter technique, maybe this is a means by which we can subliminally in our minds understand that there is a connection between the two, especially when we understand Jack, the John Travolta character, is a character that is recording things that are far away from him in terms of physical distance, but there is a compression of space because of the fact that he is able to capture the aspect of their existence from recording. And there's a very famous shot of this technique, I think, involving sometimes him in the foreground, or him in the background, and some object in the foreground. It's so. This is a kind of connecting technique, whereas the split screen might be said to be a distancing or a type of a disconnecting technique on purpose too, because as we say, the world of Blowout is about connections. It's also about the breaking of these connections. It's also about the disconnect between people. And sometimes this disconnect can have these quite significant and indeed life and death consequences, or the potential life and death consequences. And so the distancing effect or the disconnect is also important in the world of Brian De Palma, as is the connecting effect. So I love this discussion between the two of them in that way. As well as, of course, emphasizing the brilliant technique that is involved. And Brian De Palma is many things, and one of those things is the brilliant craft and technique that he brings to the table, together with the people that he's working with, such as Vilmos Zsigmond, etc., Paul Hirsch, etc. Then the discussion turns to working with the actors, such as working with John Travolta, and working with John Travolta. We hear it also in one of the other great supplements here, the interview with Nancy Allen. But it's referred to here about how it was great working with him, apparently, and also the circumstances that made him become part of this project that's Blowout to begin with. So there's also this idea of working with John Travolta a few years back on Carrie, and then since then his Hollywood star status grew in terms of his popularity. And so he that affected the budget of this film Blowout, and but also at the same time, according to De Palma, it also meant that he was able to add certain sequences that really made that are now that we watch the film, one cannot imagine the film without. So they become these essential components apparently. So wonderful details, and again, partially to do, or perhaps even more than partially to do with the great involvement of John Travolta and his star power. And also there's a great emphasis on the look and the fashion sense, and the great that look of Travolta, and how this also is an occasion for Brian De Palma to speak about his own look and his own fashion style and his own taste. Incidentally, too, there's this cool way in which we get the idea of the focus on the technique, the technical, and all the gadgets, and the way in which there's an almost mathematical precision that's at work here. And with this, we're also reminded about Brian De Palma and his own background in terms of engineering, in terms of science and math. And so I love that connection too, very much so. So there's almost this kindred spirit connection between John Travolta's character and our understanding of the interests of Brian De Palma as a person. So fantastic. And then there are other connections that are made here too. Noah Baumbach brings up other works, such as Antonioni's work called Blow Up, and also the Francis Ford Coppola work, which is called The Conversation. And so there is a wonderful discussion about how these works feed into maybe the same or similar types of concerns that are at play in a film like Blowout. But also there are some key distinctions and differences as well, which are great. For example, the way in which reenactments are presented cinematically. And there is an occasion here about how they discuss a little bit about how Francis Ford Coppola was depicting reenactments in the film The Conversation, and also the idea of layering of information, and how this is very much key to the cinematic style itself. And this is also the occasion that they bring up their great comments about Michelangelo Antonioni, and Blow Up. And also there is this type of a way in which this film figures in again to the Brian De Palma aesthetic and technique that is, of course, closely linked to the films that he made previous to this, such as Dressed to Kill. So this is really fantastic. Also, he does talk, Brian De Palma does, about some maybe mishaps that happened during the post-production in terms of the stealing of the original negative in some aspects. So this caused quite a bit of stress, as one can imagine. So, but he talks about this, and despite that, really quite, in terms of movie making, quite a catastrophic event. The fact that the filmmakers were able to put together the film that is the final version of Blood is really remarkable indeed. Brian De Palma also talks about dealing with, quote unquote, in his own words, one's own cliches. And I think he's talking about how he wants to challenge himself as an artist, how he's trying to do things that are things that he has done, but also trying to do different things. And this is one of the great challenges and one of the great strengths and gifts that are the brilliant artists of our times. So, and Brian De Palma is definitely up there. And then I mentioned the Hitchcock discussions, and there's a great discussion here about Hitchcock works, in particular Vertigo. So I'm a big fan of Vertigo, and indeed Noah Baumbach and Brian De Palma are also, it seems, great fans of Vertigo as well. There's a little bit of maybe discussion of Vertigo, and so if you haven't seen Vertigo yet, my suggestion is maybe watch the film Vertigo first before going into this discussion, because they do talk about it in the context that maybe people will have an understanding of having seen Vertigo. So, but that's just a little suggestion that I can make. But it's really wonderful overall. This is one of the great supplements from Criterion, and for good reason, because it's great. It's really great, and it's this one-on-one thing. 57 minutes. It just goes by so quickly. It's so fascinating. It's so fascinating, and it's casual, yet it's just clear and precise. And there is this matter-of-fact way about it, which is totally without any sense of pretentiousness. It's so refreshing. It is so refreshing, and the rapport between these two is great. And to get insight into Brian De Palma's philosophy as a filmmaker in the context of Blowout is wonderful. So once again, this is the Noah Baumbach interview or discussion with Brian De Palma, approximately 57 minutes. But that's not all, because we also have, as we had before, we have an interview which is described as being from 2011, approximately 25 minutes. This is with the great Nancy Allen. And Nancy Allen is, of course, a key figure in the success of this film, Blowout. And with her performance and her character, Sally, is this incredibly performed and it's a well-rendered character that has a presence all her own. And Nancy Allen, she goes into some of the details and discussions as to how she, in terms of finding the character, as she says, down to details like the voice, like the accent, the voice, and trying to find that, and how that as a detail really shows a possible connection or possible way into, or an insight into, that aspect of the character. And she mentions this, which is so fascinating. And it's not presented directly in any kind of dialogue in the film per se, but it's there in that detail of decisions that she made, all the way down to what voice she would have for purposes of this character, this great character, Sally. So wonderful. And then also talking about other inspirations for the characters. She mentions Judy Holliday, and she also mentions, Born Yesterday. She also mentions Giulietta Messina and the Fellini work, La Strada, which are so fantastic in terms of homage, and also links, and also a type of spiritual connection. And yes, this is so brilliant, so great. And indeed, we can see, therefore, that this is, we see we see the type of humanity as being captured by Brian De Palma and Nancy Allen in the context of this great character, much like Federico Fellini and Giulietta Messina did with a lot of their characters in the works that they made together as well, such as La Strada. So, wow, I've seen this interview so many times, and every time I come to this point, I am just, I'm this is so thrilling for me, and it makes me so excited, and just so much. And again, it reminds me too of how important her character is in terms of the success of this film. It is so important in terms of how we as viewers engage with this film. It's great. And then she also talks about, Nancy Allen talks about the rehearsal process, talks about working with John Travolta and that great chemistry that they have, and just working with him off set. And also there's some surprises that he had in certain scenes that they had together, which is so lovely, so brilliant. And you can see that reaction that she has. And she talks about one scene in particular about that's so cool. And so it just shows not just the great strengths of her performance, not just the great strengths of his performance, but how well they work together as well. And it shows on screen. That's so important too. It shows on screen. Such great chemistry. And also she talks about working with John Lithgow. She talks about working with Dennis Franz. Fantastic. She also talks too about maybe the aftermath after its release, reading some of the reviews, some reviews that were very positive, other reviews that were quite negative, in fact, but that also this film has this lasting legacy, and rightly so. And she's absolutely correct for saying, because it does, it really does. And it's also very important in terms of her work with Brian De Palma, and in terms of her work and her life and career, both professionally and personally, with Brian De Palma, which he also acknowledges here. So very fascinating, and one of the best as well. So it's great to have this interview with Nancy Allen, described as being from 2011, approximately 25 minutes. We got it on the earlier release, but it's great to have it also present here for this re-release. And that's not all, because we have another interview, this time with Garrett Brown. This is approximately 15 minutes, and he talks about the Steadicam and the great invention that is the Steadicam, and how this is so important in the context of a number of the key moments, the key shots, the key scenes in Blowout. And so Garrett Brown is talking about the concept of the Steadicam, how it was first conceived, and then the various, say, developments of the technology in terms of the way in which things are getting smaller, micro cameras and the like, and how the technology for the Steadicam is also decreasing in size in terms of the technology, but still the concept is there. The scientific concept is the same. And the notion of spring-loaded mechanisms and gimbals that are used to create a sense of the avoidance of what one might call the wobble that would naturally exist if one holds the camera in one's hand. And so this idea of the fluid motion would almost subliminally mimic the way in which we perceive our own point of view. And this, he says this quite interestingly, right? When we perceive things, we don't perceive things in terms of the shake of a camera, but we perceive things much like the smoothness of indeed the Steadicam shot. And so it is in many ways a reflection of our own perceptions, but also at the same time, Garrett Brown is so clever with this. He says he acknowledges that there are limitations that are inherent in the fact that this is an outside external machinery apparatus that is not human. And so he acknowledges this. So that actually creates an interesting back and forth, an interesting interplay between the technique that is the Steadicam, that in many ways seeks to mimic the human point of view experience, but at the same time, there's a technical aspect that leads, I think, also to a very fascinating conversation about the way in which cinema interacts with, or perhaps goes against the grain of, in a purposeful way, in a poetic way, the actual human point of view experience. It's this fascinating discussion. And that is, I think, the way in which we can also understand and appreciate those shots, the Steadicam shots that we see in Blowout. And he describes a number of them here, both at the beginning of the film and also later in the film. So how some of them needed to be set up. There are some specific details in, say, one of the early Steadicam shots that's used in the film, and details about how things had to be timed correctly. It's a brilliant stuff because it's also a type of long take process as well, long as in singular take process. So this is a wonderful discussion. He also talks about working with Stanley Kubrick prior to working for Brian De Palma on Blowout, and there's some key differences that were made. One of the key differences on working with Kubrick on The Shining versus working with De Palma on Blowout is that on Blowout, the notion of the use of Steadicam for a point of view shot was required. So this is a very interesting thing. Again, going back to that early discussion about how this technology can be said to be mimicking the human point of view experience, but also can be said to be limited by the technology, which is, again, so fascinating. So for these and other reasons, Garrett Brown interview is so essential. It's great to have, we had it before, it's great to have it still intact here. So the Garrett Brown interview, approximately 15 minutes. And then we have the great photos, Luz Goldman photos. This is another supplement here, and it's approximately 26 slides altogether. It's a slideshow presentation, shots of the actors, crew, behind the scenes photos. This is wonderful. I love these photo. It's not montage sets, but you press the forward button, so it's a type of slideshow presentation that you can control. You can go back and forth at your own pace. And I love these, and I love how Criterion had this type of. It was quite common, I think, for releases around the time that this was released, 2011. But maybe in recent releases, Criterion might choose to replace the slideshow presentation format in favor of an edited montage format that's like 2 or 3 minutes that they have pre-edited and put together with music overlaid, but which is fine. I really appreciate that. But there's something really cool about the slideshow photos, which I love. So whenever they have those still intact, even for re-releases, they did this for this. They also did this for something like a recent release of the Tales of Hoffman, for example. It's so cool. So it's great to have these photos, and they're great photos. So check that out if you can. And that's not all, because another supplement here that we can find is approximately an hour and 20 minutes or so. And this is it's a feature-length film from Brian De Palma. It's described here as being from 1967, although I understand on other sources it's described as being from 1968. But this is the work which is called Murder a la Mode. Now, Murder a la Mode has a connection with Blowout that is described in the menu of this supplement when you go to it. So I don't want to spoil the surprise, but if you're interested, you check out the menu and see the little description of Murder a la Mode there and see what the connection with Blowout is. It's really cool indeed. But this is so cool. This is really cool. You are getting, in essence, 2 films for the price of 1, because this is a feature-length film. It is an earlier work from Brian De Palma in the late 1960s, and so it comes we understand comes at the early part of his filmmaking career, feature filmmaking career. This is really great. It features among its own great cast. It features William Finley, and William Finley is also very much someone that we see in a lot of Brian De Palma films as well. So it's great to have the inclusion of Murder a la Mode. This is it has an experimental twist to it. It has a way in which it's working with chronology. It has a quirky sense about it. It's also using different forms of cinematic techniques, sometimes silent film techniques, sometimes the point of view techniques, sometimes what one is often referred to as a type of French new wave or nouvelle vague type of technique in terms of editing, a staccato-like way of showing a singular scene, which is very impressive indeed. So there's a lot of technique here as well. It's also a murder mystery film in a manner of speaking. So it does have that connection, I think, with what one might call the Brian De Palma aesthetic going forward, especially in the context of mystery thrillers like Blowout is. So it is... it forms nice company with Blowout. I mean, Murder a la Mode does. And so to have it included as a supplement, it's really cool. In essence, you're getting 2 films for the price of 1. So well done for being able to include this. And it was part of the earlier release. It's great. It's still intact there as well. So Murder a la Mode, the feature film, or the feature-length work from De Palma. It's described as being from 67, although there are other sources that describe it being from 68, but the late 60s. Great stuff. So 2 films for the price of 1. If you haven't seen it yet, it's very interesting indeed. Murder a la Mode. And then last but not least, we have the trailer. The theatrical trailer, which is very cool indeed. There's actually a moment where you can see how what's referred to as pan and scan, how that is seemingly shown in one of the key sequences. It's a very interesting technique indeed. And it's also showing too about how the frame, the widescreen frame, how important that is in terms of the preservation of what we were talking about earlier about the diopter technique. So that's a cool trailer, by the way. So check that out if you can. Also part of the earlier release. So these are the supplements that we found before. We still find them now, and they are great. They were great then, and they are great now. So please check those out if you haven't already. And I should also address the booklet, the great booklet, which is included here. So this is the booklet that's included for the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo. And it's wonderful because it's the staple booklet. And just like the prior release from 2011, which the booklet is right here, this booklet has same layout, the same design, and the same look, and the photo montage, and the essays too, and the writing. So we have the writing, the Michael Sragow essay, which is called American Scream, and also Pauline Kael's Portrait of the Artist as a Young Gadgeteer, which was first published in July 1981, according to this information. So we have those also intact, that we saw them before in the previous releases booklet, which is really great. The previous releases booklet was great, and this new release is it was great then, it's great now. And we also have the wonderful way in which photos are used, and the poster art, and the design. Look at this. This is one of the coolest aspects of this work, much like how the John Travolta character is working through a lot of the magazine articles that he sees. This is so cool indeed how this is included. So this is one of the best booklets, and the fact it was one of the best booklets when it was released back in the day with the earlier Criterion release, and it's still there. Wonderful stuff. And so what we're getting essentially, as the booklet shows, going back to the release overall, we're getting a lot of continuity with what we saw before and versus what we saw now, but with the added bonus, that great bonus of the 4K presentation for those who are interested and excited about that. ultimately, of course, we are getting this great re-release, which is shining a light once again on the spectacle and brilliance of this work from Brian De Palma. That is Blowout. If you haven't seen Blowout, I cannot stress enough how much I adore this film, how I am enthralled by this film, how I am so moved by this film, and how this film draws me in every single time. It is hypnotic, it is brilliant, it is one of the great examples of the brilliant work that is the art of Brian De Palma. The film is Blowout. All right, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.